February 24th, 1981. A young woman stands beside the man she's just agreed to marry. Lady Diana Spencer, 19 years old, face bright with nervous hope. A reporter asks the question that fairy tales demand. Are you in love? Diana doesn't hesitate. Of course. Then Charles speaks, and what comes out of his mouth will haunt the next 40 years of royal history. Whatever in love means. He laughed as he said it. Actually laughed. Watch the footage, frame by frame. You can see Diana's smile freeze. Her eyes dart sideways toward him. Her posture shifts backward, almost imperceptibly, but it's there. It's the body language of someone who has just heard something deeply wrong, but can't yet process what it means. That clip has been replayed millions of times since, analyzed, dissected, held up as evidence, and evidence it was. Not of British reserve, not of a man uncomfortable with public emotion, not of the complexity of royal duty that palace defenders love to cite. It was evidence of a man who couldn't bring himself to pretend, even for a single moment on camera, that he loved the woman standing beside him. Because he didn't love her. He loved someone else. He had always loved someone else. And he would continue loving someone else through the engagement, through the wedding watched by 750 million people worldwide, through the births of 2 sons, through every public appearance where Diana smiled and Charles looked elsewhere. Whatever love means wasn't a gaffe. It was a confession hiding in plain sight. The world just wasn't ready to hear it yet. To understand what Charles did to Diana, you have to understand what existed before Diana ever entered the picture. Charles met Camilla Shand in the early 1970s at a polo match in Windsor Great Park. According to royal biographers, Camilla approached him with a line that referenced their ancestors' affair. My great-grandmother was your great-great-grandfather's mistress. How about it? They started dating. Charles was deeply in love. But Camilla wasn't suitable for a future king. She wasn't a virgin. She had a romantic past. She didn't meet the impossible standards the palace demanded of a royal bride. So when Charles left for naval duty in 1973, Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles, an Army cavalry officer. The palace narrative frames this as tragic. Star-crossed lovers separated by duty. 2 people who simply met at the wrong time. This framing is a lie. Charles never let go of Camilla. He remained so close to her that he became godfather to her first child, Tom, born in December 1974. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't a man who had moved on and wished his former love well from a distance. This was a man who had found a way to stay connected to the woman he actually wanted through the socially acceptable role of godparent, maintaining access while the institution searched for someone he could officially marry. Throughout the late 1970s, as the palace pressured Charles to find a suitable bride, he continued seeing Camilla socially. They were photographed together at events. They remained in constant contact. The affair that would later be documented never truly ended. It just went underground, waiting for the convenient cover that marriage to someone else would provide. Enter Diana Spencer. Young, barely out of adolescence at 19, beautiful in a way the cameras adored, aristocratic, from the Spencer family with impeccable bloodlines, and, crucially, a virgin, which the palace considered essential for a future queen. She checked every box the institution required. Charles proposed on February 6, 1981. The wedding was set for July 29th at St. Paul's Cathedral. It would be the most-watched broadcast in television history. 750 million viewers tuning in to witness what the press breathlessly called the wedding of the century. Diana's troubles began almost immediately. Within weeks of the engagement, she developed bulimia. This timeline matters. The eating disorder didn't predate her relationship with Charles. It wasn't something she brought into the marriage. It began, by her own account in recordings made for Andrew Morton's biography, when the stress of her new life, the isolation of the palace, and the growing realization of Charles's emotional unavailability became unbearable. Her body became the only thing she could control when everything else was controlled by others. She would later describe the bulimia in her 1995 Panorama interview as a symptom of what was going on in my marriage, a direct consequence of a relationship that offered her no emotional safety from its very beginning. But the bracelet, that's when she should have run. 2 weeks before the wedding, Diana walked into an office at Buckingham Palace and saw a parcel sitting on a desk. When she asked what was inside, she was told not to look. Diana, showing the defiance that would later define her, looked anyway. Inside was a bracelet, custom designed, engraved with the letters G and F, Gladys and Fred, the pet names Charles and Camilla used for each other, taken from a Goon Show sketch. These weren't generic nicknames. They came from a specific radio comedy that Charles and Camilla had shared as a private joke, an inside reference that excluded everyone else, including the woman Charles was about to marry. He was sending a personalized love token to another woman. Days before his wedding, Diana later recounted to Andrew Morton what happened next. I walked into this man's office one day and said, "Oh, what's in that parcel?" He said, "Oh, you shouldn't look at that." I said, "Well, I'm going to look at it." I opened it, and there was the bracelet, and I said, "I know where this is going." I was devastated. She had every right to be devastated. Any woman would be devastated. But Diana wasn't any woman. She was a 19-year-old girl about to marry into an institution that had already begun closing around her like a trap. No escape route. The invitations were sent. The television contracts were signed. The world was watching. The world expected a fairy tale. The wedding day itself, July 29, 1981, was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. It was marked by private tears. Diana cried the night before the ceremony. She was overwhelmed by the bracelet, by what those entwined G and F letters meant, by the growing certainty that she was marrying a man whose heart belonged to someone else. Her sisters found her sobbing and reportedly told her it was too late to back out. The eyes of the world were watching. She had to go through with it. On the day itself, Diana put on the ivory silk taffeta dress with its 25-foot train. She walked down the 650-foot aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral past 3,500 guests. She performed the fairy tale the world had paid to see. But she was performing. Those who watched closely, and millions have watched that footage closely in the decades since, noted that her smile sometimes faltered. There were moments when her eyes looked not joyful, but dazed, almost disoriented. She famously got Charles's names wrong during the vows, calling him Philip Charles instead of Charles Philip. The press found it charming. It may have been a sign of just how overwhelmed and disconnected she felt. Years later, she would say she felt like a lamb to the slaughter. The honeymoon destroyed any remaining hope. Aboard the royal yacht Britannia, cruising the Mediterranean in what should have been romantic bliss, the truth became impossible to ignore. Charles wore gold cufflinks with the letters CC interwoven. Charles and Camilla, intertwined, even in jewelry, even on his honeymoon with his new bride. Diana noticed immediately. She confronted him. "Camilla gave you those, didn't she?" His response was dismissive, almost contemptuous in its casualness. "Yes, so what's wrong? They're a present from a friend." A present from a friend. The woman he loved, the woman he would return to, reduced to a friend, while Diana was expected to accept that her husband was wearing another woman's gift on their honeymoon, flashing those interlocked initials every time he reached for a glass, every time he gestured during conversation. During meals on the yacht, photographs of Camilla reportedly fell from Charles's diary, pictures he carried with him, unable or unwilling to be parted from her image, even as he shared a cabin with his new wife. Diana spent the honeymoon watching her husband read philosophy books by Laurens van der Post, paint watercolors of the coastline, retreat into his own intellectual world while she craved conversation, connection, touch, anything that resembled the intimacy a marriage should begin with. She wrote letters home claiming the trip was a tremendous success. Performing. Always performing. But years later, in recordings she made for Andrew Morton, she described the reality. Loneliness so profound it felt physical. Confusion about what she had done wrong, and the growing terrible certainty that she had married a man who wished he were somewhere else, with someone else. Prince William was born on June 21, 1982. Prince Harry followed on September 15, 1984. The birth of heirs should have solidified Diana's position, maybe even warmed the marriage. Instead, Diana threw herself into motherhood with a warmth and hands-on devotion that broke royal protocol. She insisted on breastfeeding. She took the boys on public engagements. She was present in ways previous royal mothers hadn't been. The public adored her for it. Charles, by multiple accounts, seemed to resent how naturally she connected with their sons, just as he resented how naturally she connected with crowds. During this period, Diana's mental health deteriorated under the weight of Charles's coldness and the palace's indifference. According to her own testimony, given in recordings for Andrew Morton and later confirmed in her Panorama interview, she attempted suicide on multiple occasions. The most documented incident occurred at Sandringham while she was pregnant with William. "I threw myself down the stairs," she told Martin Bashir in the Panorama interview, "bearing in mind I was carrying a child." The Queen comes out absolutely horrified, shaking. She was so frightened. A pregnant woman threw herself down a staircase because her husband's indifference had driven her to despair. Charles's response, by Diana's account, was cold and dismissive. He treated the incident as an embarrassment rather than an emergency, as evidence of Diana's instability rather than a symptom of his neglect. The Queen's response was similarly muted. The attitude, Diana recalled, was that she should simply pull herself together and carry on with her duties. And then came Australia. March 1983. Charles and Diana embarked on a 6-week tour of Australia and New Zealand, their first major overseas tour together. William, just 9 months old, came with them. This was Diana's idea, breaking protocol again, refusing to be separated from her baby for 6 weeks. The tour was a sensation. Crowds turned out by the hundreds of thousands. People camped overnight just to catch a glimpse of the princess. When the royal couple split up to work opposite sides of the street, standard practice for royal walkabouts, the side that got Charles audibly groaned with disappointment. Diana was a phenomenon. The cameras loved her. The public adored her. Magazines couldn't print enough covers with her face. And Charles couldn't stand it. This was the moment his jealousy crystallized into something permanent. According to multiple accounts, including those from palace staff who witnessed it firsthand, Charles grew increasingly sullen as the tour progressed. He complained about being overshadowed. He resented the media's fixation on his wife. Rather than recognizing Diana's natural gift for connecting with people as an asset to the monarchy, rather than being proud of her, grateful for her, supportive of her, he saw her popularity as a threat. To him, Charles had spent his entire life preparing to be king. He had dutifully attended engagements, given speeches, represented the crown. And here was this young woman, barely out of her teens, effortlessly commanding the adoration he had never been able to inspire. His response wasn't to learn from her, it was to resent her for it. The Australia tour established a pattern that would define their public life together. Diana drew the crowds. Diana generated the headlines. Diana was the one people wanted to see. And Charles, standing beside the most beloved woman in the world, chose to see himself as the victim. In 1986, Charles made his choice. According to Charles's own authorized biography, written by Jonathan Dimbleby with Charles's cooperation and input, Charles resumed his affair with Camilla in 1986. Just 5 years into the marriage, with Diana still hoping things could improve, still raising their young sons, still showing up day after day to fulfill her royal duties with a smile fixed on her face. He chose to betray his wife, not in a moment of weakness at a vulnerable time, not after the marriage had clearly and irretrievably broken down. He chose to return to Camilla while Diana was still his wife, still the mother of his children, still the woman he had promised to love, comfort, honor, and keep before God, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and 750 million television viewers. The affair continued throughout the rest of the marriage, through every public appearance where Charles and Diana stood side by side waving at crowds, through every Christmas at Sandringham, every state dinner, every tour of Commonwealth nations. Charles was living a double life, and Diana was trapped inside it, performing the role of loving wife while her husband's heart and body belonged to someone else. In 1989, Diana confronted Camilla directly at a birthday party for Camilla's sister. It was a rare moment when Diana stopped performing and spoke truth. She knew about the affair. She knew it had been going on for years, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. The confrontation reportedly left Camilla shaken. It changed nothing about Charles's behavior. He continued seeing Camilla. He continued lying to Diana. He continued expecting the institution to protect him while his wife suffered. 1992 was the year everything exploded. In June, Andrew Morton published Diana, Her True Story. The book was devastating, a detailed account of Diana's unhappiness, her bulimia, her suicide attempts, Charles's affair with Camilla. It portrayed Diana as a woman systematically failed by the institution she had married into, and the husband who had never wanted her. The palace denied Diana had cooperated with the book. They were lying. Diana had secretly recorded hours of testimony from Morton, smuggled out through intermediaries. Every revelation came from her own mouth. She had decided, finally, to tell her side. The book sold over 3 million copies in its first year. Translations followed in dozens of languages. The fairy tale wasn't just cracking, it was shattering in front of the entire world. And the palace had no idea how to respond. What followed was unprecedented in royal history. The War of the Waleses. Charles and Diana's camps began briefing rival journalists with competing narratives. Charles's allies painted Diana as unstable, attention-seeking, mentally unwell. Diana's allies responded with stories of Charles's coldness, his obsession with Camilla, his resentment of his own wife's popularity. Every week brought new revelations. Every tabloid ran competing scoops. The palace had survived for centuries through silence and discretion. Now, the heir to the throne and his wife were engaged in open media warfare, and every ugly detail was being documented for public consumption. The institution that prided itself on being above the fray was suddenly drowning in it. In December 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced to Parliament that the Prince and Princess of Wales were officially separating. The fairy tale was dead. But the worst revelations were still to come. In January 1993, the Camillagate tapes were published by tabloids and became an international sensation that dominated front pages for weeks. The recording, made in December 1989 by an amateur radio enthusiast who stumbled upon the frequency, captured Charles and Camilla in explicit, intimate conversation. The contents were devastating to Charles's carefully managed image. Charles expressed his longing to be with Camilla, describing fantasies that were simultaneously absurd and profoundly revealing. He said he wanted to live inside your trousers. And then came the infamous remark about wishing he could be reincarnated as Camilla's tampon. The crudeness shocked the public. Newspaper editorials expressed disgust. Comedians had material for months. The heir to the throne, the future Supreme Governor of the Church of England, had been caught on tape in a conversation so explicit that newspapers debated whether to print the full transcript. But the deeper shock, the more damaging revelation, was the intimacy the tape revealed. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't two people reconnecting after a marriage had failed. This was a sustained, deeply emotional affair between two people who spoke to each other with the casual intimacy of a long-married couple, while Charles was actually married to someone else. The tapes proved what Diana had been saying all along. There were three people in her marriage. A January 1994 poll showed that Charles's popularity had dropped by 33% since his separation from Diana. Diana remained the most popular member of the royal family by a significant margin. The public understood what they were hearing. Proof of betrayal. On June 29, 1994, Charles did something that seemed designed to control the narrative before it controlled him further. In a documentary interview with Jonathan Dimbleby, broadcast on ITV and watched by 14 million people, Charles publicly admitted to committing adultery. When asked directly if he had been faithful to Diana, he said no. He then tried to frame it carefully. He claimed he had only resumed his relationship with Camilla after the marriage had irretrievably broken down. This framing was strategic, painting the affair as a response to a failed marriage rather than a cause of it, positioning himself as a man driven back to his true love by an impossible wife. But the timeline didn't support his defense. The bracelet before the wedding, the cufflinks on the honeymoon, the photographs falling from his diary, the affair resuming in 1986, just 5 years in, while Diana was still trying. The public knew. The public had always known. On November 20th, 1995, Diana sat down with Martin Bashir for her Panorama interview. 23 million people watched in the UK alone, and Diana finally said the words that crystallized everything. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. 3 of us, so it was a bit crowded. The understatement of the century, delivered with a controlled calm that made it more devastating than any scream. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't ranting. She was simply telling the truth, finally, publicly, in her own words, about what had been done to her. And then Bashir asked what she wanted to be. Diana's answer has echoed for nearly 3 decades. I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, in people's hearts, but I don't see myself being queen of this country. I don't think many people will want me to be queen. Actually, when I say many people, I mean the establishment that I'm married into. Queen of people's hearts. She knew what she was doing. She was claiming a title the palace couldn't bestow and couldn't take away. She was redefining the terms of victory. The establishment that had tried to break her, that had protected Charles's affair, that had gaslit her about her own experiences, that had dismissed her mental health struggles as hysteria. That establishment could never make her queen. But the people already had. The divorce was finalized on August 28, 1996. Diana received a lump sum settlement of £17 million, plus approximately £400,000 per year for her private office. She was allowed to keep her apartment at Kensington Palace. She retained her title as Princess of Wales. But the palace made sure Diana paid a final price for speaking out. She was stripped of her HRH title, Her Royal Highness. The Queen reportedly wanted Diana to keep it. Charles insisted she lose it. The mother of the future king, the woman who had devoted 15 years to the institution, the woman who had borne 2 heirs to the throne, was no longer to be called Her Royal Highness. The practical consequences were humiliating. Without HRH status, Diana would technically have to curtsy to minor royals who outranked her, including, eventually, Camilla. Her security was downgraded. Her official status was diminished. She was being pushed to the margins of the institution she had helped make relevant to a new generation. It was petty. It was vindictive. And it was Charles's doing. Diana reportedly said she didn't care about the title. "I'm still the same person," she told friends. But the symbolism was unmistakable. Charles wanted to diminish her. Even in divorce, he couldn't simply let her go. He had to take something from her. William, just 14 years old at the time, reportedly told his mother, "Don't worry, Mummy. I will give it back to you one day when I am king." Even Charles's own son understood the cruelty of what his father had done. Diana died on August 31st, 1997. Paris, a car crash. She was 36 years old. The world's grief was immediate and overwhelming. Over 1 million people lined the streets of London for her funeral procession. Kensington Palace was buried in flowers, so many that staff had to clear paths through them. The Queen, whose response to Diana's death had been notably muted, was eventually forced by public pressure to address the nation and lower the flag at Buckingham Palace to half-staff. Even in death, Diana was forcing the institution to bend. For Charles and Camilla, Diana's death created a problem. Public hostility toward Camilla was intense. She was blamed, fairly or not, for destroying the fairy tale. She couldn't appear in public without risking jeers. Any thought of formalizing her relationship with Charles seemed impossible. So the palace launched what insiders called Operation PB, Parker Bowles. Over the following years, Charles's deputy private secretary, Mark Boland, orchestrated a careful campaign to rehabilitate Camilla's image. Small steps at first. Camilla appeared at Charles's 50th birthday party in 1998. Their first public appearance together. Photographs were carefully staged. Stories were planted in sympathetic outlets. The narrative shifted from the other woman to Charles's longtime companion. It was manipulation disguised as organic public acceptance. The palace that had once dismissed Diana's media savvy was now deploying every trick in the book to make the public accept the woman Diana had warned them about. Charles and Camilla married on April 9, 2005. It was a civil ceremony. The Church of England wouldn't sanction a religious wedding for 2 divorcees. The Queen didn't attend the ceremony itself, only the blessing afterward. The event was subdued, a far cry from the global spectacle of Charles's first wedding. And still, even on his wedding day to Camilla, the ghost of Diana hovered. Commentators noted the contrast. Newspapers ran side-by-side comparisons. 24 years after the wedding of the century, Charles was finally marrying the woman he'd always wanted, and the world couldn't stop thinking about the woman he should never have married in the first place. Charles has now been king for over 2 years. Camilla is queen consort. The palace PR machine has worked tirelessly to rehabilitate both their images. Carefully managed charity appearances, strategic documentary coverage, soft-focus magazine spreads. It hasn't worked. 26 years after her death, Diana still upstages them. Every poll confirms it. Diana remains more beloved than Camilla, by significant margins. When William and Harry make news, it's their connection to Diana that people talk about. When The Crown aired its Diana storyline, viewership spiked, and social media erupted with renewed outrage at Charles's treatment of her. Harry has spoken publicly about his mother, about the grief that shaped his life, about the institution that failed to protect her. In interviews, in his memoir, in documentary footage, Harry keeps Diana's memory alive and reminds the world what was done to her. Every August 31st, people still leave flowers at Kensington Palace, still remember her, still believe her. The palace tried to rewrite history. They tried to position Charles and Camilla as a love story that deserved a happy ending. They tried to let time smooth over what he did. Time hasn't smoothed over anything. Diana's shadow is longer now than it was in 1997, and Charles has to live with that. He has to live with the fact that his coronation was shadowed by commentary about his first wife. He has to live with the fact that his sons carry Diana's legacy more visibly than they carry his. He has to live with the fact that when people think of the British monarchy in the late 20th century, they don't think of him. They think of her. Here's the thing about Diana's story. It isn't complicated. It isn't a tragedy of two incompatible people. It isn't a sad tale of a marriage that simply didn't work out. Charles knew he loved Camilla when he proposed to Diana. He sent Camilla a bracelet days before his wedding. He wore her cufflinks on his honeymoon. He carried her photographs in his diary. He resumed the affair in 1986, while Diana was still trying, still hoping, still raising his children. He continued it for years, while Diana suffered from bulimia, from depression, from suicide attempts that he dismissed as attention-seeking. He resented her popularity instead of celebrating it. He insisted she be stripped of her title in the divorce. He used the institution to protect himself while it gaslit his wife. And when the truth came out, when the tapes were published, when the affair was confirmed, when Diana finally told her side of the story, the best Charles could offer was that he'd only cheated after the marriage was irretrievably broken down. The timeline proves that's not true. The bracelet proves it's not true. The cufflinks prove it's not true. His own biography proves it's not true. Diana said there were 3 of us in this marriage. She was right. She was always right. And 26 years after her death, the Queen of Hearts still wins. Charles got the crown. Diana got the hearts. History knows which one matters more. Subscribe for more stories like this.